Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, taking you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Iran vows to destroy Middle East water and energy facilities if US attacks power plants as deadline looms nearer. US and UK discuss the need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as strikes continue in the Middle East. And 4 people killed plus 7 wounded in Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon. First this morning, the US deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz has entered its final 24 hours, with both sides threatening strikes on energy infrastructure as shipping through the key oil route declines. Meanwhile, Israel is preparing for weeks of intensified conflict against Iran and Hezbollah.
The United States and Iran are nearing a critical deadline over the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's busiest oil shipping routes. US President Donald Trump has warned that the United States will obliterate Iranian power plants if Tehran does not reopen the waterway unconditionally within 48 hours, a deadline that is now entering its final 24 hours. In a statement on X, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian described US threats as a sign of desperation. He said the strait remains open to all except those who violate Iran's sovereignty, but warned Tehran is ready to fully close the route if its energy infrastructure is attacked. Iranian officials also said US-linked oil fields in the Gulf region could be targeted if the United States carries out its threat. The Strait of Hormuz is a critical global shipping lane with around 3,000 vessels transiting each month. Traffic has dropped sharply in recent days due to security concerns. At least 21 ships have been hit, targeted, or reported attacks since the conflict began. Meanwhile, Israel says it is preparing for a prolonged conflict. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, said its Chief of General Staff, Eyal Zamir, has approved plans to continue operations against Hezbollah. Zamir said the campaign against Hezbollah has only just begun and would continue beyond operations in Iran. He described it as a prolonged campaign and said Israel is preparing for expanded ground operations and further strikes under an organized plan. Air raid sirens sounded across Israel early Sunday, warning of incoming Iranian missiles. The alerts followed overnight strikes in the southern towns of Arad and Dimona, where dozens were injured. Emergency services report that 1 person has been killed and more than 160 injured in Iranian missile strikes on Israel in the past 24 hours. The IDF says it expects several more weeks of fighting against Iran and Hezbollah as it prepares to expand operations in Lebanon.
Now let's go to the stories making the front pages this morning, and we head first to the BBC's front page, and it talks about Starmer and Trump discuss need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as strikes continue in Middle East. Now that's also our first report that you would have just seen there about the continued strikes that Israel is also placing in Lebanon and a number of things that's happened over the weekend. But on Sunday evening, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and US President Donald Trump actually spoke on the phone and agreed that reopening the Strait of Hormuz is essential to resume global shipping in regards to what is going on with the conflict in the Middle East. Now, Trump has threatened to obliterate Iranian power plants if the strait was not reopened within 48 hours. However, Iran says the strait is open to all except those who violate our soil, is what an Iran statement put out. But it says that it warns it stands ready to completely shut access to the waterway if its energy infrastructure is struck. So Israel Defense Forces have also said that it expects to face several more weeks of fighting against Iran and Hezbollah as it prepares to expand its operations in Beirut and alongside a number of other cities. Now, there are a number of countries that have been impacted by the oil shipping route and the high oil prices, which we've been reporting for the past month now since the attack on Iran started. Now, Pakistan and the Philippines have adopted a temporary 4-day work week due to the rise in fuel prices. Slovenia and Slovakia have imposed limits on fuel at petrol pumps stations as well. And Bangladesh has closed universities and launched fuel limits in relation to fuel prices rising. Now, Keir Starmer is set to chair an emergency meeting on the economic fallout from the war in Iran later today, which will keep you updated as to how that goes and what the outcomes of that will be. Right, now we turn to our next story making headlines this morning, and that's on The Guardian, and that's in regards to Hawaii. And this footage, as you can see here, if we just press play, you're able to see aerial footage of the extent of Hawaii flooding, the worst in more than 20 years. So these pictures here that you're going to see very shortly shows floodwaters around Oahu's north shore of Wailua. Officials urged a number of people who are hard hit in these areas to leave now after heavy rain fell on soil already saturated by downpours from a winter storm a week earlier. The warning came on Saturday, and then it prompted evacuation orders for over 5,000 people from North Honolulu. Now, muddy floodwaters covered streets and farmland, which is what you're seeing right now. And even actor Jason Momoa had to evacuate his home, which he posted on social media. Now, Governor Josh Green said the cost of the storm could actually reach top $1 billion, including damage to airports, schools, roads, homes, and a Maui hospital in Kailua. He also said that the flooding was the state's most serious since 2004. So we know that this is something that we are going to definitely keep you on top of more than. We know now that more than 200 people were rescued from the rising waters, authorities have said, but no deaths were reported, which is good news considering how much of a flood that has hit this particular area in Hawaii. Okay, now we go to our next story, which is on Le Monde website, and that's in regards to the French municipal elections. The second round of results of key races now in. So France's socialists hold onto major power in the city's elections, boost for mainstream areas after their wins. The key areas of Paris, Marseille, Lyon and Lille. This is the second round of votes, which began on Sunday evening and ended overnight as well in regards to that. Now, Emmanuel Grégoire, elected mayor of Paris, and it has extended the Socialist Party's rule for 25 years. Eric Kikotti, the new far-right mayor of Nice, has also won in that seat, and his win is also a partial victory for Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardela's party as well. Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party now controls Bordeaux and Annecy. It's the first two big local wins. However, there are some losers in all of this. François Bayrou, the former Prime Minister, lost in his own city of Pau, which could mark the end of his decades-long career, political career as well. The Greens, France's environmentalists, have lost control of several cities they won during the last municipal elections, and the National Rally were unable to make gains in cities in Nimes and Toulon. The big lesson of the evening was the failure of alliances, though, between mainstream left and the LFI, with voters turning to the centre and right in long-time socialist parties. But we have more on that later on in the programme to give you an overview of how the elections went for Paris and a number of other major cities in France. Well, that's your press roundup for the morning. After the break, I'll be discussing the rest of the global stories. Make sure you don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the global stories. Tensions between Israel and Hezbollah persist after Israeli airstrikes struck multiple towns in southern Lebanon and targeted a key coastal bridge, which killed and injured several people. Here's that report.
At least 4 people have been killed and 7 others injured in a wave of Israeli airstrikes across southern Lebanon, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. Officials quoted by the national news agency said the casualties resulted from 2 strikes targeting the towns of Al-Sultaniya and Al-Sawana in the Nabatia region. Israeli forces also hit the Kasmir Bridge along the coastal highway linking Sidon to areas south of the Litani River. The strike came shortly after the Israeli military warned it would target the bridge, alleging it was being used for militant activity and the movement of operatives under civilian cover.
In order
Earlier on Sunday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the army to strike bridges over the Litani River. In the Nabatea region as well, warplanes targeted Yamar al-Shakif and carried out a series of intense strikes on the towns of Shukin, Meifadoun and Zebdin. In a statement released on Sunday, Israel's Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, said he had met senior officers to approve operational plans against Hezbollah in Lebanon. He warned the mission against Hezbollah had only just begun and would be prolonged. The escalation follows a cross-border attack by Hezbollah on March 2nd, after which Israel launched sustained air raids and a ground offensive in southern Lebanon. Lebanese authorities say at least 1,024 people have been killed and 2,740 injured since the hostilities began.
Staying on the war in Iran, US President Donald Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer say restoring flows through the Strait of Hormuz is vital for global energy stability. In London, an emergency COBRA meeting will be held later today to assess the economic impact.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and US President Donald Trump have stressed the urgent need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz during a phone call on Sunday as tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate. A spokesperson for Downing Street said the two leaders agreed that restoring shipping through the strait is essential to stabilising global energy markets. The waterway is one of the world's most critical oil transit routes, with around 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas supplies typically passing through it each day. However, traffic has dropped by about 95% since the outbreak of conflict on February 28th, when US and Israeli strikes targeted Iran. The disruption has sent shockwaves through global markets, with crude oil prices rising by roughly 45% to around $106 per barrel, increasing concerns over inflation and the cost of living worldwide. Starmer is set to chair an emergency COBRA meeting on Monday to assess the economic fallout. The meeting will bring together senior ministers along with Andrew Bailey to discuss energy security, supply chain disruptions, and the potential impact on households and businesses. Officials say Starmer and Trump agreed to stay in close contact amid growing fears that further escalation could deepen the global energy crisis and place additional strain on already fragile economic conditions.
Well, this morning oil prices remain broadly steady, and it's something that we'll be making sure we keep a close eye on as markets weighed rising tensions in the Middle East against the prospect of increased supply. Now, Brent crude hovered just above $110 a barrel, slipping slightly to around $112 per barrel, while US Texas Intermediate edged higher to roughly $98 a barrel. Analysts say prices could climb further if tensions escalate, with some forecasts suggesting Brent may rise to between $120 and $150 a barrel. Investors are weighing threats from Washington and Tehran after US waived sanctions on 140 million Iranian barrels of oil entering global markets, the highest since 2022. Iranians have gathered in Tehran on Sunday for a pro-government rally, waving flags and holding images of Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei. The rally comes in the middle of heightened regional tensions linked to the Strait of Hormuz. Some protesters criticized US President Donald Trump following his latest warnings. Trump said the United States could target Iran's power infrastructure if the oil pathway is not reopened within 48 hours. And it's this pressure that many are hoping will bring an end to the oil crisis and conflict in the Middle East. Here to further unpack this is sustainability and energy expert Özgür Güven. Thank you for joining me. My first question on this is the growing oil prices is a global concern, and countries have had to temporarily adapt, some imposing fuel limits and others reducing their working week. If Iran doesn't bend to Trump's threat, what could be the long-term implications of that? Hello? Can you hear me? I just want to say that.
Tougher. Many is actually being a farmer myself. I am witness to agriculture.
Okay, I think we have some technical issues. I'm not able to actually hear you, so we'll have to come back. Hopefully we can get the line a little bit clearer to hear what you have to say. But thank you so much, Mr. Govan. Hopefully we'll come back to you shortly. Now moving over to another story, and the Trump administration says immigration and customs enforcement agents, which is ICE, will be deployed to US airports from today to help manage long security lines. President Donald Trump announced the move while border czar Tom Homan said details are still being finalized. The plan has drawn criticism from the union representing Transportation Security Administration staff, which says trained officers should be paid rather than replaced by untrained armed agents. Passengers have faced hours-long delays in recent days as a partial government shutdown leaves Transportation Security Administration workers unpaid, worsening staff shortages and disrupting airport operations. Turning to France and mayoral city elections, and a victory for socialist Emmanuel Grégoire, who defeated conservative rival Rachida Dati to become Paris's new mayor. There were plenty more winners and losers as votes were counted overnight. Here's the roundup.
Emmanuel Grégoire has won the Paris mayoral election, defeating former minister Rachida Dati and extending the left's 25-year control of the capital.
For tomorrow, our country enters its next democratic chapter, the 2027 presidential election. We had a taste of it during these municipal elections. The battle for France will be harsh, it will be violent, and it will be crucial. The masks have come off, and many are ready to abandon what they believe in. Many are ready for all kinds of alliances for a few points in the polls. The women and men of Paris have proven it today. When faced with their history, when alone with their consciences in the voting booth, Parisians rise to the occasion.
Other candidates, including far-right figure Sarah Knafo, had withdrawn in support of Dati ahead of the vote. Dati, who campaigned on improving security and cleanliness, conceded defeat, saying she had failed to convince voters that change was necessary. She also criticised what she described as below-the-belt attacks during the campaign, adding that division had taken its toll. Grégoire said his victory sends a message from the capital. Grégoire later rode his bicycle to City Hall, where outgoing Mayor Anne Hidalgo formally handed him the keys to the city. The result comes as France's far right also failed to take control of other major cities, including Marseille and Toulon. Grégoire now takes over from Hidalgo, continuing a period of socialist leadership marked by major urban changes, including expanded cycling lanes and reduced car traffic along parts of the Seine.
Moving to another election in Europe, and Slovenia's ruling Freedom Movement and the opposition Slovenian Democratic Party were tied in Sunday's parliamentary vote, with more than 99% of ballots counted. Neither bloc appeared likely to secure the 46 seats needed for the majority in the 90-seat parliament, even with coalition partners. Smaller parties that pass the 4% threshold are expected to play a decisive role in forming the next government. Protests have turned violent in Albania's capital, Tirana, as opposition supporters demand the government step down over a high-profile corruption case involving the deputy prime minister. Here's more.
Clashes broke out in Albania's capital Tirana as opposition supporters protested against the government. Police used water cannon to push back crowds after demonstrators threw petrol bombs and fireworks near Prime Minister Edi Rama's office. The protests were triggered by allegations against Deputy Prime Minister Belinda Baluku. Prosecutors accuse her of interfering in public tenders for major infrastructure projects and favoring certain companies, accusations she denies. An anti-corruption court has suspended Baluku from her post, and prosecutors are seeking her arrest. However, earlier this month, Parliament voted against lifting her immunity, preventing any immediate detention. The case has deepened political tensions in the country at a time when Albania is seeking to join the European Union, with officials in Brussels calling for stronger efforts to tackle corruption and organised crime.
An explosion in Rome's Piani del Sol area has caused several apartment buildings to collapse, leaving at least 3 people injured and forcing dozens to evacuate. Those injured include an elderly couple, and a 24-year-old man was taken to hospital. Several teams of firefighters and police were sent to the area to deal with the aftermath of the explosion. Mayor Roberto Galtieri thanked emergency services and said firefighters will determine the cause, but added it appears to be a liquefied petroleum gas cylinder in one of the homes. Turning to Latin America, and authorities in Cuba say efforts are underway to bring the national grid back online following another widespread power failure. It's the second power outage in a week due to US-imposed oil blockade. This report highlights what some Cubans had to say about it.
Cuba has begun restoring electricity across parts of the country after its national grid suffered another major collapse, leaving millions without power for the second time in a week. The outage on Saturday evening was triggered by a failure at a key power plant in Camagüey province, according to the national grid operator UNE, causing a chain reaction that shut down the system. Authorities say electricity is now gradually returning, with essential services such as hospitals and water systems being prioritized through smaller local networks set up across the island.
At this moment, power has been restored from Pinar del Rio province to Santiago de Cuba. Throughout the day, Unit 1 of the Havana thermoelectric plant, Unit number 4 of the Cienfuegos thermoelectric plant, and the Guterres unit have been reconnected. At this moment, all essential facilities are receiving service from the system.
Life in Havana was still heavily affected, with residents describing ongoing uncertainty and hardship caused by repeated blackouts.
The thermoelectric plants breaking down one after another, the lack of oil, the supposed blockade, or the blockade, I don't know. And in the end, those who are suffering are the people. Besides the fact that there's no food, there are thousands of resources that don't exist in this country. Now, with these blackouts, the little food people have spoils, and you don't know what to do anymore. You don't know if you can buy food for a month, or for a week, or for a day, because you never know when the electricity will go out. 1 minute, everything is lit up, and the next minute, everything goes down.
The blackout is the latest in a series of power failures on the island this month, highlighting the strain on Cuba's aging energy infrastructure. Officials have pointed to fuel shortages and long-standing system issues, while also blaming external restrictions on oil supplies for worsening the crisis.
Staying in Latin America, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, said he knows U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio does not like him, but warned that Latin American, Caribbean and African nations are united against all forms of domination, including blockades and wars. Speaking at a CELAC Africa meeting in Bogota, he called for greater cooperation to tackle global challenges such as the climate crisis. The Colombian president added that while the primary goal of the United Nations is to maintain international peace and security, he said if the UN is not preventing wars, one would well conclude that it is no longer useful. Here's what he had to say.
My response to Marco Rubio, whom I know does not like me very much, is this. The main thesis of this period of humanity is not how to define a white, Western, and Christian civilization as in the old Crusades.
Kenya has resumed work on a China-backed railway project after a 6-year hiatus. The line will link to the port of Mombasa with Uganda's capital, Kampala, creating a strategic transport corridor across East Africa. Here's more.
On Saturday, Kenya resumed work on a long-delayed railway extension set to link the port of Mombasa with Uganda's capital, Kampala, reviving a key infrastructure project after a 6-year halt due to funding constraints.
We break ground on the 107-kilometer Kisumu-Malaba section of the SGR, complete nearly 1,000 kilometers seamless rail link from Mombasa to Malaba and forming a vital connection to the Malaba-Kampala line.
The extension will create a continuous rail corridor from Kenya's Indian Ocean coast to the Malaba border, where it is expected to connect with Uganda's planned Malaba-Kampala line, providing a major transport artery for landlocked countries across East and Central Africa. Work on the western section had stalled in 2019 after China, which had financed earlier phases of the SGR, declined to provide further sovereign loans amid concerns over Kenya's growing debt burden.
Over to a quick break now. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional headlines, where an analyst will be able to join me to dig further into some of the stories. Stay with me. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's take a look at the stories impacting the region. 7 people have been killed in a helicopter crash in Qatar's territorial waters on Sunday. Turkey's National Defense Ministry said 1 Turkish Armed Forces member and 2 Aselsan technicians were among the people killed. The Qatari and Turkish Defense Ministry said the helicopter crashed after a technical malfunction, which the Qatari ministry said was during a routine duty. It added that the exact cause of the crash will be determined following an investigation by Qatari authorities. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan expressed deep sorrow over the lives lost due to the terrible incident. Over to Turkey, and 2 buildings have collapsed in Istanbul following an explosion believed to have been caused by a gas leak. Authorities say 9 people trapped under the rubble have been rescued and taken to hospital. However, search and rescue operations are continuing, with 2 individuals still believed to be trapped beneath the debris. The governor of Istanbul, Davut Gül, has confirmed that efforts are ongoing. He visited the site where the explosion occurred and received briefings from the emergency response teams. Armenia plans to lease long-neglected agricultural land to active farmers under a new government initiative, a plan aimed at boosting agriculture in the country. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said the proposal is aimed at bringing unused land back into production while protecting the rights of landowners. Under the plan, land that has been left idle for years could be leased, with rental payments held in designated accounts. If the original owners come forward, they will receive the accumulated rent. Turning to Georgia, and crowds paid their respects to one of the most influential spiritual figures in its modern history, Catholicos, Patriarch of all Georgia, Ilya II, on Sunday. Our correspondent has more from Tbilisi.
Thousands gathered at the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Tbilisi, where for days citizens stood in continuous lines, day and night, to pay their final respects to Catholicos, Patriarch of all Georgia, Ilya II. The cathedral remained open 24 hours a day, with mourners even spending the night in its courtyard, reflecting the profound love and reverence held for the Patriarch. The funeral service brought together not only the Georgian Orthodox Church, but also representatives of various religious communities, highlighting Ilya II's lifelong commitment to unity and dialogue. The ceremony was attended by high-ranking clergy from around the world, including Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew I of the Eastern Orthodox Church, who described Ilya II as a wise leader and peacemaker, emphasizing that Georgia has lost a spiritual father. Alongside religious leaders, Georgian officials and international dignitaries paid tribute to the Patriarch's legacy. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze and other government representatives were present, while messages of condolence were sent by global figures. including King Charles III of the United Kingdom, who highlighted Ilya II's moral authority and the respect he commanded both at home and abroad. The significance of the funeral extended beyond Georgia, becoming a moment of regional solidarity. Delegations from across the South Caucasus attended to honor his memory, including those from Armenia and Azerbaijan, underlining the patriarch's role as a figure of peace and connection in the region. Later in the day at 3 o'clock, a solemn funeral procession moved from the Holy Trinity Cathedral through the streets of Tbilisi to Siani Cathedral, where Ilya II was laid to rest. A live corridor of citizens lined the route, many carrying flowers, while large screens allowed thousands more to follow the service and pay their respects. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Now turning to our top story in relation to the conflict in the Middle East and following President Donald Trump's 48-hour ultimatum for Iran to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which expires today, a senior IRGC spokesperson general has suggested that the US and Israeli officials could be targeted even beyond conventional measures and include civilian, recreational or tourist sites. Joining me now to discuss this is Mohammad Mamadov, research fellow at the Top Chubasov Center. Thank you for joining me this morning. Let's get straight to it, really. How should we interpret Iran's threat in regards to retaliating by targeting civilian spaces? Does this mean that any US or Israeli official present in the South Caucasus and the Gulf could be treated as a potential target?
Yeah, thank you. I think since the war has started in March, what I've been seeing the major trend in Iranian retaliation has been that the more Iran is weakened and the more Iran is cornered, it becomes more unpredictable. So I think that if Trump is following on his threats regarding targeting Iranian power plants and some other civilian infrastructure, we can see that Iran will retaliate, reciprocate with the threats you just mentioned. So the civilian targets has already been on the Iranian list since the middle of the war. Just a few days ago, Iran targeted Israeli neighborhood where its nuclear plant is located, and now I think what Iranian strategy is that they want to impose civilian costs on the Israeli side to push them toward a ceasefire or stopping the war. So right now there are two pillars of the strategy. One is imposing civilian costs. The other is imposing severe economic costs on the Gulf countries so that they would push the United States and Israel toward stopping the war. So yeah, I think it will all depend on the next stage of American and Israeli designs on Iran, and Tehran looks more than prepared to retaliate.
Yes, they don't seem that they want to back down or, heed to President Donald Trump's threats. But if Iran increasingly feels concerned, then should we therefore also be concerned at the possibility that it may rely more heavily on asymmetric methods?
Yes. Again, from this beginning of the war, what is clear from the Iranian side is that they are no match for Israel and the United States on, military capabilities. They have so far been relying on, as expected, on ballistic missiles and drones and their proxies in Iraq, Yemen. Okay, Houthis has not yet joined, and mostly Hezbollah. Yeah, Hezbollah is targeting northern Israel. So the response from the Iranian side will definitely be asymmetric, and their strategy is survival, using asymmetric measures to survive this war. So again, if the United States and Israel will increase the pressure, they will refer to their traditional asymmetric methods to impose costs in the United States, not to win the war, but to force Tel Aviv and Washington to stop the attacks.
Yes, they're definitely basing their position on defense in regards to how this war came about. But in view of reported disruption of an IRGC-linked plot targeting Baku, Tbilisi and the Chayan pipeline, how important then is the protection of regional energy infrastructure in the South Caucasus?
Yeah, it becomes vital because, both Azerbaijan, Georgia, and of course Turkey is highly dependent on this pipeline, and it's very strategic for regional energy security. And I think it has been one of the deterrents, especially Turkish factor, that Iran has been more measured in its approach toward the pipeline compared to what has been doing to Gulf energy infrastructure. But the point is that if we see that, again, Trump is following on his threat that the United States will target power plants in Iran and we can see that Iran will retaliate with targeting regional energy infrastructure. And I don't know how Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline sits in that picture, because it will create a huge miscalculation. And if somehow Britain is involved, because we have been seeing that Iranian foreign minister have been warning Britain that it should not let United States to use its air bases to attack Iran. So as BTC is highly closely associated with Britain, also because BP is present here. So yeah, it can somehow engage BTC in the IRGC's worst case calculations, and it would highly increase miscalculation on the Iranian part. So that's an expectation, but for now, it's very, I don't think it's a high probability because of two factors. Again, Turkey, and other one is Azerbaijan is a direct neighbor of Iran, and there is a big ethnic Azerbaijani population living in Iran. It would open Pandora's box for Tehran too.
Yes, yes. So you're saying that it's unlikely they would want to target that just because of its close ties with Azerbaijan and, and the diaspora, as well as Turkey as well. In that sense, could Azerbaijan's sovereign airspace become a primary target for Iranian electronic warfare to disrupt global trade? Because we can see what's going on in the airspace. There's, flights being rerouted, and transport corridors are changing. But Azerbaijan, that particular route has been now used heavily during this time just because of what's going on in the Middle East. Do you think that could be a target?
The point is that I think hopefully it will not come to that, because I think Tehran is more busy targeting more strategic infrastructure in the Gulf that again, to push the United States and Israel stop the war. So I think the targets you just mentioned are not in the high, let's say, target list of Iran. So I don't think that so far it will come to that. But it's a war, and again, if Washington escalates in the upcoming days, we can see anything happen. But so far, we see that compared to the beginning of the war, IRGC and military decision makers in Tehran have become more measured. Yesterday, they said that they will not target Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and because they are highly concerned that Saudi Arabia, quite an important power in the Middle East, if involved, it would raise the cost for Tehran. So they have become recently more, I think, rational in their calculations. So I'm sure that Azerbaijan is also a very, very important factor for them. They would not be open to the decision that to open another front, again, very serious one, that would sap their resources, which is very limited, to react Tel Aviv and Washington. So yeah, I think that's not in the high agenda of Tehran now.
I just want to bring the conversation to what may happen later on today in relation to UK and US talks. We know that US President Donald Trump spoke with the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer in relation to reopening, the need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. What can these two countries do in regards to that? We know that Trump has already given out his threat. However, he's very much, relying on other allied countries to come in and step in to help with the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. What do you think we can expect from that? And will that impact Iran's position?
So the point is that United States may launch a ground invasion of, I do not think it will be on the Kharg Island, but mostly in the coastal regions in the southern part of Iran, which would create some buffer zone for the United States to implement its, as you mentioned, securing the cargo traffic along the Hormuz. Again, this is very big task, very difficult a mountain to climb almost for the United States to do. But so far, the deployment of Marines and other troops and new capabilities to the close to the region shows that Washington is up to something similar to that scenario. Again, it shows that they target southern coastline, shoreline of Iranian borders. So, but when it comes to UK involvement, we saw that 2 days ago the Iranian side threw ballistic missile to Diego Garcia Island in part of Chagos Island in the Indian Ocean. So it showed Iranian capabilities to reach European capitals. I think on the side of Tehran, it was kind of a deterrent mechanism, showing UK and other European capitals that to be not engaged in the United States and Israeli operations against Iran. I don't know what kind of a deterrent effect it will create on the UK side, but so far what we see that they are coordinating, Washington and London, and maybe in the upcoming days we can see some joint operation on the ground.
Yes, I know that yesterday one of the cabinet ministers for the UK, actually Steve Reed, mentioned that because Israel had put out a post saying that Iran's missiles could actually hit London, Paris and Brussels because of information and intellect in relation to what they've been able to find. However, that was kind of like pushed down to one side, saying that they had seen no evidence that this could actually happen in regards to Tehran's capabilities and possibilities. But could that be an option? Is that a scare tactic that Tehran is trying to use to say that if the UK was to be more involved, that this could actually reach their waters as well?
Definitely. I think the main rationale behind that attack on the Diego Garcia base, again, which the US is using against Iran, because it cannot so freely use the airspace and air bases in Saudi Arabia mostly, and the United Arab Emirates. So Diego Garcia is very strategic, and so far during the reign of Khamenei, who was killed in the early days of the war, the limit of the Iranian ballistic missiles outreach was 2,000 kilometers. And now the distance from the Iranian territory to Diego Garcia was about 4,000 kilometers. That means, if Iran can reach to Diego Garcia Island, they can easily reach to Paris, London, and Rome. So I think by doing that, they sent signal to the UK that, that previous knowledge of 2,000 kilometer limit is past. Now Iran has bigger capabilities and they can impose costs on the European countries if they join the war on the side of Israel and the United States.
And does this anyhow confirm what Israel has always said in regards to Iran's threat in relation to nuclear arms and things like that, saying that, they are a threat not just to Israel and the US, but to the wider globe, because they're able to have ballistic missiles, and, if they were to increase their nuclear program, this could actually be catastrophic?
Of course, nuclear proliferation is a threat to regional peace. Of course, on the Israeli side, there was some over-exaggeration of the situation in Iran because, for some time there was quite open process going between Iran and the IAEA and international community. Its nuclear facilities and program was open to international community. And then we had Trump and some uncertainty emerged in the last 5 years. But still, I think even some experts say that the reason Iran is undergoing these weakness today vis-a-vis US and Israel is that all its ballistic missile and nuclear program was open to the external observers, and everyone now knows Iran's weaknesses. So in that regard, yes, Iranian nuclear ambiguity policy in the last 5 years created both threat perception. It triggered threat perception on the side of international community, but at the same time did not give Iran nuclear weapons, so brought us to this severe security dilemma that in the end brought all sides into the war.
And my last question, does the destruction of an Iranian naval near the Anzali port mark a turning point for the Caspian? Could this impact strategic routes, do you think?
Definitely. Because we see that in the last few days, the I mean, the theater of war has still been expanding, and Israel attacks on the port of Anzali makes the Caspian Sea as part of this broader theater of war. And we see that in the near upcoming days, Houthis can join and close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It will be huge escalation. And Saudi and UAE has recently been saying that they are also concerning some kind of involvement in the attacks because the Iranian side does not stop the attacks on their territory. So if we see that some kind of ground invasion of Kharg Island, or as I said, the southern shores of the Caspian Sea, we can see that, I mean, all parts of these theaters will be involved, and it will increase the uncertainty for countries, including the ones on the shores of the Caspian Sea. Azerbaijan is part of that. Our middle corridor is running through this, and energy pipelines and etc. all can be part of broader theater of war if we see a U.S. ground invasion against Iran.
Yes, well, thank you so much for joining me this morning, Mr. Mammadov, and for your insights. They've been very insightful. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Turning to Kyrgyzstan, and its President Sadir Japarov has praised the ongoing initiative to construct a railway that connects China to Europe. The project, which began in 2024, is expected to be completed by 2030. Our correspondent in Almaty brought this in.
A new railway route linking China, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, which will bypass Kazakhstan, is expected to be completed by 2030. The announcement was made by Kyrgyz President Sadir Japarov, who said the project could transform the country from what he described as a logistical dead end into a key transport hub between Europe and China. Construction of the $4.7 billion railway began in late December 2024. The total length will reach 502 kilometers, with more than 300 kilometers running across Kyrgyzstan. The route is expected to cut the distance between Europe and China by around 900 kilometers and significantly reduce delivery times. Freight between China and Germany, for example, could take as little as 12 days, which is critical for time-sensitive goods. Officials in Bishkek say the project will strengthen Kyrgyzstan's role in regional trade, create new transport links, and open faster access to international markets. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A News.
Turning to East Asia, and humanoid robots have appeared in a traditional street procession in southern China, joining locals in centuries-old folk ritual. The unusual mix of technology and culture drew much attention as the event unfolded in Xianyang. Here's more on that story.
Humanoid robots have joined a traditional Ying Laoye folk procession in Jieyang in southern China, combining modern technology with a centuries-old cultural ritual. The event, also known as a Wandering Gods ceremony, is usually held in the first or second month of the lunar calendar. Villagers carry deity statues through the streets accompanied by drums, gongs and firecrackers, praying for safety and prosperity. This year, robots dressed in traditional clothing took part in the procession alongside performers and locals. They marched through the streets as part of the celebration, drawing attention from crowds. At one point, one robot appeared to malfunction and was carried by participants, while others continued moving with the procession. The event reflects both the preservation of local tradition and China's growing use of robotics in public cultural displays.
Now, if you like something that is more focused around comics, this could be just for you. Fans of comics and gaming and anime have gathered in Toronto for one of the city's biggest pop culture events, with thousands turning out in elaborate costumes for this year's Comic-Con in Canada. Now let's take a look at some of these amazing costumes.
Cosplayers filled the convention floor in Toronto, dancing, posing and interacting with crowds. Thousands moved through the convention centre halls, showcasing handmade outfits inspired by comics, gaming and anime.
Yeah, I made it all by hand, except, like belt, tights, boots. I bought those. But yeah, I think the hardest piece was probably the headpiece. It took me a lot of trial and error to get it right, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out.
The three-day Comic-Con event draws thousands each year, bringing fans together to celebrate pop culture.
I'm an Ultramarine from the game Warhammer 40,000. This isn't personally what I play, but this is my dad's army. It took us about 120 hours of work to get it to the level it is.
For many, cosplay is not only about creativity, but also confidence and self-expression. Fans also paid tribute to well-known characters, while others highlighted the strong sense of community at the event.
Some amazing costumes there. I think if I had a choice, I would have to go for something that's in Dragon Ball Z. I'm a massive Dragon Ball Z fan, so I'll do something in relation to a costume there. But thank you so much for joining me this morning. Make sure you stay tuned to A News, and I'll be back later to provide you with further information about the top stories happening across the day. Stay tuned.